Go ahead and begin making your way back to your seats. I tell you what, guys, hey, one of the things that's vastly different about Thursday nights and Sunday mornings is I get up on stage and I start saying anything and immediately the room gets quiet because everybody's like, okay, we're locked in. Salt Company is always like, man, you guys just got energy. I tell you, like, this is usually when I'm going to bed, but you guys are just ready to rock and roll. So I'm excited to be here. Guys, if we haven't met yet, my name is Mason Van Beek and I'm on staff with Great Oaks Church, which if you're unaware, Salt Company is a ministry of a local church, and that local church is Great Oaks, the same church that meets here on a Sunday morning at 9:30 on Sundays. And that's actually why, because Salt Company is a ministry of Great Oaks Church, that's a reason why you were handed the card that you were given, that small 4x4 card that says Great Oaks Christmas Drive on it. The reason you were handed that is because Salt Company being a ministry of Great Oaks Church, we want to invite you into what we're doing at Great Oaks Church in an effort to bless the community that you're now a part of as a student. And so I just want to make sure that if you got that card or if you didn't, you know exactly what it is for. Great Oaks, every Christmas season is going to do something like this, a Christmas drive of some sorts to raise or gather materials or something to bless a local ministry organization in Mankato. In this specific Christmas, we have chosen to bless the ministry of Five Sparrows Foster Closet. And if you're unaware of what that is, it's a relatively new organization in ministry, but my wife and I have been directly impacted by this organization as we've stepped into foster care. We right now have 2 foster kids in our home alongside of our other 2 children, and they, on the first day of our placement, showed up at our door with 2 backpacks full of clothes, of diapers, of wipes, of a Bible for our son, of a devotional for my wife and I. It's a Christian organization that just genuinely seeks to love and care for foster families and foster kids. And we would love to bless them in a particular way this Christmas season. So the way we're going to do that is you guys as Salt Company, as college students, we encourage you over the next 2 weeks that you have before December 4th, the last Thursday night that you guys will gather together, to buy a toy for any child from the age of 0 to 11, you can see on there, or a gift card for anywhere that you would believe a 12-year-old through a 17-year-old kid would enjoy getting a gift card to. And you'll bring all of those items back, the toys, the gift cards, back on December 4th, Thursday. I will gather those materials after you guys bring them here. I will give them to Five Sparrows Foster Closet, and they will then distribute them to foster families so that foster kids all across the greater Mankato area will receive some sort of gift this Christmas season in a really unique, difficult spot for the kids that are in foster care. So we want to invite you into that. If you have any questions about that, you can ask me afterwards, but we want you to be a part of what our church is doing in an effort to bless the community that you're a student in and we are a church in this Christmas season. That's exactly how we're going to do that. But this evening, I get the opportunity to continue to lead us forward in our Red Flags series. So if you have your Bibles, Proverbs chapter 13 is where we'll be at. We've been in Proverbs throughout this whole series, and tonight specifically, we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 13. And as you're turning there, I want to make an assumption about you, even though I might not know you, just based on the simple fact that you're sitting here this evening. I want to make an assumption about you based on the simple fact that you're here this evening. And that assumption is this: you're here tonight because there's a piece of you, no matter how small or how big, that desires in some way, shape, or form to know how to skillfully navigate your life in terms of God's commands in the season of life that you're in. You somehow want to know how to skillfully navigate the season of life that you're in and how it correlates to following God. That might look like answering the question who God is. It might look like answering the question, how do I follow God? It might look like a vast multitude of things, but you're here this evening, even if you were drugged along, because there's a part of you that wants to know how to skillfully live in accordance to God's commands in the season of life that you're in. And I would call that wisdom. You desire wisdom. Christian wisdom. You desire the knowledge to know how to skillfully navigate life as you desire to pursue and follow God. Now, let me tell you why the red flag that we're talking about tonight is so important for us to talk about if that is true of you. Because the red flag we're about to talk about tonight is the number one thing that will prevent you from gaining the wisdom that you hope to find. The red flag that we're about to talk about tonight, it will be the number one thing that prevents you from allowing you to learn how to skillfully follow God in the season of life that you're in. Because the red flag we're looking at tonight is arrogance. Arrogance will be the number one thing that prevents you from growing in wisdom and knowing how to skillfully follow God in the season of life that you're in. And so in order to help you see what I mean by that, we need to first begin asking and answering the question, what is arrogance? If it's going to be the number one thing that is going to stop us from gaining the wisdom that we're seeking, we need to ask the question, what is arrogance? A simple definition of arrogance, if you have notes, the question is, what is arrogance? The answer to that question is this: it's an exaggerated self-importance. Arrogance is an exaggerated self-importance. In other words, you make yourself more important than you ought to. James, I'm going to make a switch here. I can hear myself. I'm guessing everybody else can. Arrogance is an exaggerated self-importance. Oftentimes when we think about arrogance, though, when we think about somebody who's arrogant, we think about someone who thinks too highly of themselves, right? We're thinking about somebody who constantly talks about themselves, the latest accomplishment, the work they're doing, the money they're making, the thing that they bought, the test score they're getting, the weight they're lifting in the weight room, the weight they're losing in the weight room, the speed they're running on the track. I mean, the list goes on. Typically, when we think about an arrogant person, this is the kind of person we think of, the person who thinks too highly of themselves. However, because arrogance is just simply an exaggerated self-importance, someone who is arrogant is not only somebody who thinks too highly of themselves, but is actually also somebody who thinks too lowly of themselves. Here's what I mean by that. Somebody who thinks too highly of themselves is somebody who constantly talks about themselves, thinks about how great they are. Somebody who thinks too lowly of themselves is still only thinking about themselves, and they might not be talking about themselves, but they're thinking about themselves constantly. I'm not good enough. I don't measure up. I won't be good enough. I should have done that differently. The list goes on. You might not be talking about it, but all you're doing is constantly thinking about yourself. And it may not show on the surface that they're concerned with themselves, but internally, all they're thinking about is themselves. But to fully understand what arrogance is, I don't think we just need to know the definition of it, but I think we need to know what it does. What does arrogance do then? If it's an exaggerated self-importance, if it's something that makes us think too highly of ourselves or too lowly of ourselves, what exactly does it do? Now, it can and does affect a lot of areas of our life, but tonight we're going to see in Proverbs 13, we're going to look at one specific area that's impacted by arrogance, and that is this area. It affects our ability to receive correction. If arrogance is an exaggerated self-importance, then what it does is it impacts our ability to receive correction. If we're arrogant in either of the two ways, if we think too highly of ourselves or too lowly of ourselves, we are not going to be able to receive correction. And if we're not able to receive correction, we're not going to be teachable. And if we're not teachable, we're not going to receive the wisdom that we're seeking after. Dakota Jackson, one of the guys I was on staff with at Candeo Church, when talking about arrogance, used this visual picture with 3 different objects that helped me understand what arrogance is and what it does. So I want to share it with you right now. I want you to think about here, just visually with me, think about correction. Think about correction like a comb that you use for your hair. Right, a comb that you use for hair. Correction is a comb that you use for your hair. Then I want you to think about the person who thinks too highly of themselves like a steel ball. I want you to think about the person who thinks too highly of themselves like a steel ball. If I had a steel ball up here and I had a comb up here, if I tried to mold or shape that steel ball in any way with a comb, nothing is going to happen. That steel ball is not going to change in the slightest, not going to be impacted, not going to be changed, not going to be molded, not going to be shaped. In the same way, somebody who thinks too highly of themselves, even though they may hear correction and be around correction, they will not be molded or shaped or changed because they believe they don't need it. They believe they don't need correction. Arrogance is causing them to think too highly of themselves. If the person who thinks too highly of themselves is a steel ball, then I want you to think about the person who thinks too lowly of themselves as a fully inflated balloon. If I had a fully inflated balloon up here and I had a comb up here, if I tried to mold or shape that fully inflated balloon at all with a comb that had sharp edges, what's going to happen? Pop. The balloon might change to some degree, but it's not going to be in a positive way. Correction is actually going to be the thing that causes that balloon to pop, and when it pops, it's going to believe, hey, I can never be what I'm supposed to be. I can never change in that way. I will never be good enough. As it is for the person who thinks too lowly of themselves. When they receive correction, it shatters them and shakes them for days and weeks and months because they believe not that they're too good to receive correction, but they believe that no correction will ever make me good enough. It doesn't matter if I change, I still won't be good enough. So if we're not supposed to be a steel ball or a fully inflated balloon when it comes to correction and the impact that it has on our lives, then what should we be? Here it is. We should be like Play-Doh. It's maybe just because I'm a parent, but I love Play-Doh. My kids, they love Play-Doh. There's things that your kids do that you're like, I hope you say you want to do this right now because I love doing that just as much as you do. So I love playing with Play-Doh. And you want to know why I love playing with Play-Doh? The reality is the reason I love it is because Play-Doh is moldable and shapeable enough that I can make it into what I want it to be, but I'm not so worried about it being so fragile that it breaks when I try to mold it or shape it. If I had Play-Doh up here and I took a comb of correction to Play-Doh, that Play-Doh would be impacted, molded, shaped. There would be an impression from that comb on that Play-Doh, but that Play-Doh would not break or pop or shatter when it receives correction. What I'm trying to say is when it comes to correction, arrogance is going to cause us to be like a steel ball or a fully inflated balloon, and what we should be is Play-Doh in terms of receiving correction. Because if we want to be teachable, if we want the wisdom that we long to find because we're sitting here, we must be willing to receive correction and be teachable. When I got to this point in writing this sermon, though, it dawned upon me that just knowing this, just knowing what arrogance is and what it does, is not simply going to be enough to turn you from being arrogant to being teachable. Or that just knowing what arrogance is and what it does is not going to cause you to desire to be teachable and receive correction. Because I believe that in order for you to turn from arrogance to teachability, we need to ask and answer another question. And if you're taking notes, here's the next one that we're going to answer. Why is teachability so important? Why is teachability so important? I know I had you turn to Proverbs 13 a while ago. We're going there now, okay? Hopefully you're there by now. I gave you a little bit of time. So Proverbs chapter 13, I want you to begin looking with me at verse 13. Because in verse 13, we are going to see in the first half of it why it is that teachability is so important. First half of Proverbs 13:13 says this: the one who has contempt for instruction will pay the penalty. If we have contempt and are unable to receive instruction or correction, it says that there is a penalty for not being teachable. In fact, we're going to see that there's not just a penalty that Proverbs 13 talks about, but there are 3 penalties that come from not being teachable.
And the first one we see is in Proverbs 13, jumping up now to verse 10. Penalty number 1, arrogance leads, this is Proverbs 13:10, arrogance leads to nothing but strife. Arrogance leads to nothing but strife. The first penalty for not being teachable or for being arrogant is that it leads to strife. If you're not good with words like me, you might not know what strife is. Maybe you're smarter than me. You're college students. I did get a degree, but I still had to look up synonyms for strife because I needed to know what word was like it. If you don't know what strife is, think conflict. The first penalty for somebody who is not teachable is conflict, which if you think about it for even a moment, if you're not teachable, it's pretty clear that you're going to face conflict. And the reason it's clear that you're going to face conflict is because there are things that need to be corrected in your life. And the reason you're going to face conflict is because no matter how clear that correction is to those around you, when they share it with you, if you think too highly of yourself, you are going to be in conflict because people are going to approach you with a correction and they will never see you change and you will never receive their correction because of your arrogance making you think too highly of yourself, causing there to be conflict because you're unable to see the ways in which you need to grow as you follow Jesus. And if you think too lowly of yourself, you'll always be in conflict, but in a different way, because nobody will ever know how to actually approach you when it comes to things that you need to grow in. They'll see things that you need to grow in, and it's not that they won't tell you about them, or it's not that when you think too highly of yourself, people will tell you and confront you. When you think too lowly of yourself, you're in conflict because the people around you who care about you won't know how to actually address the ways that you need to grow without popping you. So the first penalty for our lack of teachability or our arrogance is strife or conflict. The second penalty in regards to our lack of teachability is found in verse 18. So we're jumping down now to verse 18, the first half of it that says this: poverty and disgrace come to those who ignore discipline. Poverty and disgrace come to those who ignore discipline. We actually see two penalties in this one verse. The first one is that poverty will be experienced by those who ignore discipline, who ignore correction. What does that mean? How does a lack of teachability produce poverty? Well, if poverty, when we think of poverty, we typically think of something along the lines of a state of lacking financial resources or an ability to have the things that you need on a daily basis. How does a lack of teachability lead then to poverty? Well, real practically, ponder this for a moment. What company is going to allow you to keep a job if you're not teachable? What job, what company is going to allow for you to keep a job if you're not teachable? And if you don't have a job, what kind of means financially are you going to have to produce the basic standard of living that you need? Now, I'm not saying that all poverty is a result of arrogance or a lack of teachability, but I think Proverbs 13 is creating a category in which poverty can be experienced just simply due to the fact that we are lacking teachability. But I think poverty even means more than that here. It's not just simply financial resources, but I think it goes beyond that to the point where spiritually we will be impoverished to some degree if we're not teachable, if we're not willing to receive the correction and direction that Proverbs or God or the Bible itself even gives and speaks into our lives. So poverty, second penalty that we can experience is a lack of our teachability. The third one, seen in the same verse, is disgrace. Disgrace. Penalty number 3, disgrace. Disgrace is defined as a loss of reputation or respect as a result of dishonorable action. Disgrace is defined, I'll read it again, as a loss of reputation or respect as a result of a dishonorable action. Meaning a lack of teachability and unwillingness, aka a dishonorable act, can lead to a loss of reputation and a loss of respect due to our arrogance and lack of teachability. Therefore, if we aren't teachable, this proverb is telling us that the penalty for that is strife, poverty, and disgrace. But even now, I don't think knowing the penalty for being arrogant or for lacking teachability is still even enough for you to turn from your arrogance and turn towards teachability. Here's what I mean by that. In a similar way, if all you told me was the negative reasons behind why I shouldn't eat ice cream after breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which some days I really want to do, to be honest, I love ice cream. But if all you did was tell me, hey, these are the negative things that you will experience if you eat ice cream after breakfast, lunch, and dinner, reality is I'm still probably going to eat ice cream after all 3 meals. But if you pair that with, hey, not only are these the negative effects you're going to experience if you eat ice cream after breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but here are the positive things you're going to experience if you don't eat ice cream after breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I might begin to consider why I would turn from eating ice cream at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I still might consider it, but I might consider more strongly, why would I not turn from doing that? And so I want to turn now from not just looking at the penalties of a lack of teachability, but I want to turn and look at the rewards of teachability. What are we rewarded with if we are teachable, if we receive correction? Because we actually see that in Proverbs 13:13, we read the first half of it, but it says in the second half of it this: the one who respects a command will be rewarded. There are rewards to being teachable and receiving correction. And I would argue that the reward behind that is this wisdom that we're talking about. In fact, that's the first reward that we see as we go back to verse 10 again. We see in verse 10, we saw that arrogance leads to nothing but strife or conflict. But the second half of this says, but wisdom is gained by those who take advice. Wisdom is gained by those who take advice. So we see that the first reward to being teachable and receiving correction is wisdom, is knowing how to skillfully navigate our lives in accordance with God's commands. But here's what I've learned in my time in ministry, but specifically in college ministry, and I'm not saying that I've been around for a long time, but it's not typically that college students don't know what wisdom is, it's that they don't actually know how valuable wisdom is. I think you could tell me what wisdom is, but I don't necessarily know if you know just how rewarding and valuable wisdom is. If you're wondering just how valuable wisdom is, it says this in verse 14 of our text. Right after verse 13, it says this: a wise person's instruction is a fountain of life, turning people away from the snares of death. The wisdom we can receive from being teachable and receiving correction is described as a fountain of life, which can turn us from the snares of death. Growing up in Northwest Iowa, setting snares and trapping was actually a pretty common thing that people did. We didn't have anything to do in Northwest Iowa. We farmed, we hunted, and we trapped. That's what happened. Okay, that's what people did. Trapping was a common thing for an outdoorsman to do, in which they would set traps or snares in places that they would anticipate small game animals to run through, in which the trap or snare would catch that animal. After the animal was caught, they would kill the animal, they would keep the pelt, or they would eat the meat, or they would do both. Right? That was what was done in Northwest Iowa in terms of setting snares or traps. As I was thinking about that, the reason this came to my mind is because Satan is trying to do everything he can to catch us in the traps or snares of death. He is trying to anticipate where we're going to go and what we're going to seek after, and he's trying to set traps and snares in order to catch us in those traps of death. Because the only way we're going to avoid these traps is if we receive the wisdom and teachability from those who can see what's coming ahead of us, or those who have themselves been caught in the snare or trap we're about to step into. Did you ever realize that a lot of times when people share wisdom with you, they say something like, I don't want you to experience the hurt that I did, so stop doing what you're doing? They're essentially saying, hey, let me pay the dumb tax for you. Let me tell you the dumb thing you're about to do is going to lead to this, and I paid the price for it already, so don't do it yourself. They're trying to say, hey, look out ahead. Satan has a trap and a snare ahead, and if you don't listen to me, you're going to experience the same hurt that I did. Now, this isn't me saying, I don't want to get this wrong here, because this isn't me saying that every time somebody shares wisdom, it's because they've stepped into the snare themselves. Right? There's a reality that there's also people around us that would have the ability in wisdom to say, hey, I haven't stepped there, but I can see where you're about to step and how Satan might use this to catch you in a trap. I mean, think about God himself, right? He is a God of wisdom. He doesn't have wisdom just because he's stepped in all the traps. He has wisdom because he's able to see the traps that are ahead of us and wants to lead us to the fountain of life instead of the snares of death. And that's exactly, in a lot of ways, what Proverbs is. Trying to anticipate the snares and traps that Satan has set, and instead steering us to the fountain of life with wisdom. Because the point is this, we must understand and see that wisdom is value. Wisdom's not just a reward, it is a valuable reward. One that will keep you from the snares of death that Satan is anticipating you're going to step into. But wisdom isn't the only reward that we get to experience when we are teachable and receive correction. The other reward that we can experience is honor. If you're taking notes, this second reward that we can experience is honor. If disgrace comes to those who are lacking teachability, then honor is something that comes to those who receive teachability. You see, anybody that has ever said, if you've read a coach that has said, hey, I don't have favorites as a coach. I'm here to tell you, as a middle school football coach, any coach that has said that is probably lying to you, okay? I'm just being honest, okay? Guys, I had favorite middle school football players. And my favorites weren't actually the ones who were scoring the most touchdowns or making the most tackles. Now, granted, we weren't very good anyways, so I didn't have many touchdowns or tackles. But my favorite players were not them. It was actually those who, when I instructed them in some way, they actually were teachable and did what I told them to do. Because they respected what I was saying, and in turn, I desired to respect and honor them in the same way back. We can receive honor from receiving the correction and being teachable when it comes to the things that people are sharing around us. And I think it actually goes beyond that. I think there's a reality that God feels similarly in this honor and respect of us when we hear his commands and we desire to be teachable and receive his correction and wisdom in the same way. So up to this point, just to bring us up to speed with where we're at, up to this point we've seen what arrogance is. We've seen what arrogance does to us. We've seen the penalties of not being teachable and the rewards of being teachable. And now I want to turn to the practical then. Because maybe just now you're getting to the point where, hey, maybe it is actually worth turning from my arrogance and turning towards teachability. Maybe it's worth turning from my arrogance and turning towards teachability. And my hope is that not only would you just begin to turn that way, that you would just begin to think that way, but then I would actually give you practical things you can begin to do if that's true of you. So I want to give you 5 practical action steps that you could take moving forward if you're desiring, hey, I want to turn from arrogance and I want to turn towards teachability. Now, this isn't like hey, start with step 1, move to step 2, move to step 3. And it's not even necessarily a list where it's like, hey, do all 5 at the same time. It really should just act as a launching pad for you as you hope to begin to become a teachable person who receives correction. So I want to begin with the first step, and I actually want to bring us back to the beginning of Proverbs 13. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but Proverbs 13, verse 1, gives us a great starting point in our first action step for those who desire to be teachable. It says this, Proverbs 13:1, a wise son responds to his father's discipline, but a mocker doesn't listen to rebuke. Action step number 1 is this, respond to your parents' correction. Respond to your parents' correction. Now, I realize this isn't the case for everyone in the room, so I know I made a general observation of everybody in the room beforehand. I'm now recognizing that, hey, this observation I'm about to make, I know is not true for everybody in this room, but I still dare to bet that it's true for a majority of this room. And I dare to bet that your parents are actually still the ones who love you the most, have spent the most time with you, and know you the best. And if you're not desiring or able to receive correction from the people who love you the most, know you the best, and have known you the longest, how are you going to receive correction from anybody else? I know, maybe parents aren't the most skillful when it comes to correction, and maybe their correction is a little bit more pointed and a little bit more directed at you when it comes, but have you ever thought that maybe that's just simply because they've known you for so many years, and they know who you are, they know your tendencies, they know what you've done, they know how you think. And whether you like to admit it or not, your parents do have some level of wisdom that you don't have, just simply because they're older and have more experience than you do. And truth be told, even if you would sit here right now and you would tell me, hey, my parents, they're not like that. They don't love me the most. They haven't spent the most time with me. They don't know me the best. Truth be told, even if that's the case, your parents still likely have some level of authority in your life right now. I know that it's a varying degree, some more than less, some less than others. I know that there's varying degrees of authority that your parents have over you, but there's a reality, though, that if you're unable and unwilling to just simply respond to the correction of your parents, who are a form of authority in your life, who is to say that you won't also begin to become unable and unwilling to respond to correction of other authorities in your life? Professors, campus security, bosses, police officers, the list goes on. I'm not saying your parents are perfect. I'm not saying that you only do this with perfect parents. What I am saying is they do have some level of authority in your life, and I'm just asking you to exercise the thought that if you're unwilling to receive their correction and respond to their authority, who's to say that you won't also begin to do that with other forms of authority? First, begin responding to your parents' correction. Second action step then, going back to Proverbs 13, verse 10. Arrogance leads to nothing but strife, but wisdom is gained by those who take advice. Action step number 2 is this: take advice. If we want to be teachable and gain wisdom, we must take advice. What does this look like practically? Well, when somebody asks you, hey, can I share something with you? And they begin to share something with you about the decision you are about to make or the way that you're living, you don't immediately shut the conversation down or become defensive, but you actually receive what they have to say. Does this get easier? Guys, absolutely not. Maybe year 28 has something different for me, but I'm telling you, I just turned 27 not too long ago. This is still extremely hard for me to take advice. I mean, just earlier this week, I received some form of correction in my life. I went to this text later on in the afternoon and realized that as in reading through this text, I had to go back and apologize to the person who gave me correction because I said, I did not respond in the way that I should have when you gave me advice and correction. It's not simple, guys. It's not easy. Taking advice is not easy because it's admitting to the fact that the person who's sharing with you might actually be right and you might need to think differently or make a change. It doesn't get easier, but it is absolutely important if we want to be teachable people who receive correction. Let's move on to our third possible action step then. In verse 13, we see it. It says, the one who has contempt for instruction will pay the penalty, but the one who respects a command will be rewarded. Action step number 3 is respect a command. This one ties a little bit into the first action step that I already listed with you, but respecting a command. See, this is at times, sometimes when it comes to correction and teachability, that comes in forms of suggestions. Other times correction comes in forms of commands. Because the person giving you a correction is a form of authority in your life, it comes as a command. Like your parents and what I mentioned earlier. Because the win when it comes to receiving your parents' correction or any form of authority's correction isn't just to simply do what they ask you to do, but to actually do it in a respectful way. The win isn't doing and correcting the thing that they asked you to do. That's only part of it. If you do it in a way where you grumble and your attitude is poor, you talk behind their back, you talk disrespectful about them, even though you're doing what they ask you to do, you're not actually teachable. You might be like me in another way, a people pleaser. I want you to be pleased by me, but I'm not always pleased at the things that you ask me to do. We need to respect a command. Fourth action step then is this, 13:18. Verse 18, it gives us our next one. Poverty and disgrace come to those who ignore discipline, but the one who accepts correction will be honored. Fourth action step is this, accept correction. Again, this one ties onto our second one. We not only need to hear advice or take advice, but we actually need to accept correction. It's not just about hearing what somebody is saying. We actually need to accept what they're saying and live differently as a result of it. You can be really good at hearing correction. You can also be really good about hearing it and not doing anything about it. Again, hearing it is one part of it. Accepting that it's true of you and desiring to make a change is a whole nother part of teachability in receiving correction. Fifth and final action step is this. It's in verse 20, one that we haven't talked about yet. It says this, the one who walks with the wise will become wise, but a companion of fools will suffer harm. Action step number 5, walk with the wise. This likely goes without saying, but those who are wise are those who have wisdom. Right? Those who are wise are those who have wisdom. And remember that wisdom is defined as skillfully living according to God's ways and the nuances of life. So think for a moment then, who do you know that's able to do that? Who is able to skillfully live in accordance to God's command in the season of life that you're in? Is it a parent? Is it a connection group leader? Is it Max or Andy? Is it an older sibling, a spiritual mentor, a connection group member, a classmate, a teammate, a younger sibling? You likely have at least one or more people that come to your mind when you think about somebody who has wisdom and knowledge that will help you live according to God's commands in the season of life that you are in. And you have to ask yourself the question, am I walking with them? Not do I know them, but am I walking with them? Am I surrounding myself with them? It's said that you become like the sum total of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Is there at least one or multiple people in those top 5 that you would describe as wise? Now, not to take away from the importance of the 5 action steps that I just listed and to take away from everything that I just said, but I have one more thing to share with you that I want you to make a list of its own for. And I want you to title the list this. The list title is this, the most important action step. One more list, the most important action step list. The only thing that goes on that list is this action step. Take your eyes off of yourself and fix them on Jesus. I'm not saying don't do any of the 5 things that I just listed. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying don't start with some of those things. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is you will do all of those things in vain if all you're still doing is looking at yourself and not fixing your eyes on Jesus. And when we do that, we will see the one who came to this earth and lived the perfect life you couldn't live, died the death you deserve, and rose again 3 days later, and is now sitting at the right hand of God the Father Almighty, waiting to come back again and make all things right. And when we look at him, this will kill arrogance and make us a teachable people. Because in looking at Jesus, we remember the gospel. And when we remember the gospel, we remember that I'm never beyond the need for God's grace, and I'm also never beyond the reach of God's grace. And when we believe that, we will never think too highly of ourselves or too lowly of ourselves in arrogance, because God's grace will never be out of our reach, and it will never be something we don't need. And we will remember to take our eyes off of ourselves and fix them on Jesus, to be a teachable people and not an arrogant people, so that we have the wisdom to live according to God's commands in the season of life that we're in. Let's pray. God, that's all that I ask. Oftentimes, God, the thought process is to start with the most important thing, to begin where it's most important. God, I feel like right now I'm ending with the most important thing, and my hope would be that this would actually be the end of a teaching, but a beginning for people who want to turn from arrogance and become teachable. And the beginning is this: take your eyes off of yourself and fix them on Jesus. Fix them on the one who came to this earth humbly to die in our place so that we could have resurrection life for an eternity. And how could we not take our eyes off of ourselves and look to him and desire to grow and desire to be teachable, and remembering we're never beyond the needs for God's grace, and we're never beyond the reach of God's grace. And when we remember that, would we become a teachable people who receive correction in hopes that we will learn how to follow your commands skillfully in the season of life that we're in. Help us, God. It's your name we pray. Amen. Take a moment before we continue on in worship to sit where you're at and reflect on this question: where are your eyes? Are they on you, or are they on Jesus? And if they're on you, what is it going to take to fix them on Jesus? And then we'll continue on in worship through singing.